My wife demanded a divorce, claiming I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight her. She served me papers in front of our neighbors, laughing that she'd get everything. When I showed up to court with the city's most feared divorce attorney, she went pale until he introduced himself as my older brother, the one she never knew existed. Hey viewers, welcome to the channel. We are just starting and your support means a lot. If you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. I, Jake 34, never thought my wife of 8 years would try to destroy me in front of our entire neighborhood, but here we are. My name is Jake Morrison, and this is the story of how my wife, Melissa Torres 32, learned that sometimes the quiet guy you married has a few surprises left. Let me start from the beginning. Melissa and I met at a coffee shop downtown 9 years ago. I was working as a high school history teacher, making a decent but modest salary, and she was finishing her master's in business administration. She was ambitious, driven, and had big dreams about climbing the corporate ladder. I found her determination attractive, and she seemed to appreciate my stability and calm nature. Our early relationship was good. I supported her through her final year of school, helped her prepare for job interviews, and celebrated when she landed her first position at a mid-sized marketing firm. Melissa was making about the same as me initially, and we felt like partners building something together. That changed when she got her first promotion 2 years into our marriage. Suddenly, she was making $20,000 more than me, and the dynamic shifted in ways I didn't fully understand at first. She'd make little comments about my teacher salary or suggest I should consider more lucrative career options. At the time, I thought she was trying to motivate me to grow professionally. By year 3, Melissa had been promoted twice more and was making almost double my income. The comments became less subtle. She'd complain about carrying more of the financial burden, even though we split expenses proportionally based on our incomes. She'd make jokes about being married to a poor teacher in front of her work friends. I started to feel like my career choice was something to be ashamed of. Real problems started when Melissa's company relocated her to a senior position that came with a significant raise. She was now making more than 3 times my teacher's salary, and our entire relationship dynamic changed. She became controlling about money, dismissive of my opinions, and increasingly embarrassed by my profession when we were around her colleagues. Jake, maybe you should consider becoming a principal or moving into administration, she'd suggest regularly. Teachers don't make real money. I can't be the only one building wealth in this marriage forever. I loved teaching. I was good at it, my students respected me, and I felt like I was making a difference. Melissa's constant pressure made me question whether my passion was worth the strain it was putting on our marriage. I started looking into administrative roles, not because I wanted them, but because I wanted peace at home. The breaking point came last spring during a neighborhood barbecue at our friend's house. Lived in a nice middle-class neighborhood where most couples had similar income levels. Melissa had been drinking and was holding court with a group of neighbors, telling stories about her latest business trip and promotion. "You're so lucky to have such a successful wife," said our neighbor Carol Henderson, 45, smiling at me across the patio. Before I could respond, Melissa laughed loudly. "Oh, Jake's lucky, all right. Good thing one of us has ambition. Someone has to pay for our lifestyle since teachers basically work for charity." The group went quiet. I felt my face burning with embarrassment, but I tried to laugh it off. Teaching has its rewards beyond money. "Sure," Melissa said, taking another sip of her wine. "The reward of summer vacations and a pension that won't even cover our current grocery budget." I made an excuse and went inside to help with dishes, but I could hear her continuing to make jokes about my income and career choice. That night, I realized that the woman I'd married no longer existed. Her place was someone who saw me as a financial liability rather than a life partner. Things got progressively worse over the following months. Melissa started making unilateral decisions about our finances, our social calendar, even our home renovations. When I'd object, she'd shut me down with comments about who was really paying for everything. She treated me like a dependent rather than her husband. The final straw came this past winter. Melissa had been working late frequently, and I suspected she might be having an affair. When I tried to talk to her about spending more time together, she exploded. "Jake, I'm building a career while you're playing with finger paints and teaching kids about the Civil War. Maybe if you contributed more to our household, you'd have more say in how we spend our time." "Melissa, I work just as hard as you do. Teaching isn't easy, and teaching isn't real work, Jake. It's babysitting with lesson plans. I make more in 2 months than you make all year. This marriage feels like I'm supporting a grown man who won't get a real job." That night, I slept in our guest room for the first time in our marriage. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, wondering how we'd gotten to this point. I'd given up my dreams of traveling and writing during summers. I'd taken on extra coaching duties to bring in more money, and I'd endured years of being made to feel inadequate. Nothing was ever enough. The next morning, Melissa was gone before I woke up. She left a note saying she was staying at her friend Diana Kim's, 30, apartment and needed space to think about our future. She didn't come home for 3 days. When she finally returned, she had papers with her, Divorce papers. Jake, I've made a decision. This marriage isn't working for me anymore. I need a partner who can match my ambition and contribute equally to our lifestyle. I stared at the papers she'd placed on our kitchen table. Melissa, we can work through this. Maybe we should try counseling. She shook her head. I don't want to work through this. I want out. I've already talked to a lawyer, and honestly, this should be pretty straightforward. I make most of the money. I can afford good representation, and well, you probably can't afford to fight me on much. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. She'd not only decided to end our marriage, she was already strategizing how to use my income against me in the divorce. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying that I'll be generous in the settlement, but I expect to keep the house, most of our investments, and obviously my retirement accounts. You can keep your car and your teacher pension, but let's be realistic about what makes sense financially. Melissa, half of those investments came from money I saved before we got married. The house down payment included money from my grandfather's inheritance. Jake, you need to be practical. I can afford a lawyer who will fight for my interests. Can you? On a teacher's salary with legal fees of $300 an hour, how long will you be able to sustain a battle? It's better for both of us if we keep this simple. That's when I realized this wasn't just about wanting a divorce. This was about her belief that she could use my financial limitations to intimidate me into accepting whatever terms she dictated. She saw me as too weak and too poor to fight back. Over the next 2 weeks, Melissa made sure everyone knew about our divorce. She told our neighbors, our mutual friends, and even reached out to some of my colleagues at school. But she didn't just tell them we were getting divorced. She made sure to emphasize her version of why. Jake's just not ambitious enough for me, she told anyone who would listen. I need a partner who can keep up with my lifestyle and goals. The worst part was how she talked about the divorce proceedings. She'd openly brag about her legal representation and make comments about how easy the process would be since I couldn't afford to put up much of a fight. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning when she had the papers served, but she didn't just have them delivered quietly. She arranged for the process server to arrive at 10 in the morning when she knew our neighbors would be out doing yard work and weekend errands. I was washing my car in the driveway when a man in a suit approached me. Jake Morrison. Yes, you've been served. He handed me an envelope and walked away. I looked up to see Melissa standing in our front yard, arms crossed, with a satisfied smile on her face. Several neighbors had stopped what they were doing to watch the interaction. Carol Henderson was standing in her driveway with her husband, both of them staring. Well, Jake, Melissa called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. Now it's official. I hope you can find a lawyer you can actually afford. She turned to Carol. I told him he should just accept my terms. Fighting this will just cost him money he doesn't have. Some people have to learn the hard way. Standing there in my driveway, holding divorce papers while my wife publicly humiliated me in front of our neighbors, I felt something inside me snap. Not anger exactly, but a cold determination I hadn't felt in years. That evening, I made a phone call I probably should have made years earlier. Thomas, it's Jake. I need to talk to you about something important. Thomas Morrison, 38, is my older brother. He's also someone Melissa has never met, and for good reason. Thomas and I had a complicated relationship growing up. He was the golden child, brilliant in school, captain of the debate team, full scholarship to Harvard Law School. I was the steady, reliable one who became a teacher and lived a quiet life. Thomas became a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. He became one of the most feared divorce attorneys in the city, the kind of lawyer wealthy people hire when they want to destroy their ex-spouse financially. His reputation was legendary, and his fees reflected it. He'd been estranged for about 10 years after a family dispute over our parents' estate. Not enemies exactly, but we lived completely separate lives. I'd never mentioned him to Melissa because, frankly, I was embarrassed by our relationship. He represented everything she wished I could be: wealthy, powerful, successful. When I called him that night, I wasn't even sure he'd take my call. Jake, Jesus, it's been 5 years since we talked? Something like that. Thomas, I need help. I'm going through a divorce and it's complicated. I told him the whole story. About Melissa's escalating contempt for my career, about her public humiliation tactics, about her assumption that I couldn't afford to fight her. I told him about the scene in our driveway and her comments about my financial limitations. Thomas was quiet for a long time after I finished. Jake, I owe you an apology for how things have been between us, and I owe you more than that for being a pompous ass when we were younger. Thomas, that's not why I called. Let me finish. You became a teacher because you wanted to make a difference. I became a lawyer because I wanted to make money. We both succeeded, but only one of us should be proud of what we chose. I've spent 10 years destroying marriages for rich people who treat their spouses like assets to be liquidated. You've spent 10 years shaping young minds and making the world better. I didn't know what to say. Here's what's going to happen, Jake. I'm taking your case, and I'm taking it pro bono, not because you can't afford me, but because your wife needs to learn that there are consequences for treating good people like garbage. Thomas, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do this. Besides, it's been a while since I've had a case where I genuinely wanted to destroy the other side. This will be fun. Over the next month, Thomas and I rebuilt our relationship while he built my legal strategy. He was thorough, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. He investigated Melissa's finances, her behavior, her attempts to hide assets, and her public statements about the divorce. Jake, your wife has made several critical errors. First, she's been bragging about her financial superiority and your supposed inability to fight back. That establishes a pattern of financial abuse. Second, she's been trying to manipulate the narrative publicly, which shows calculated cruelty. Third, she's vastly underestimated both your actual financial position and your family connections. What do you mean about my financial position? Thomas smiled. Jake, you've been married 8 years in a community property state. Her income, her promotions, her investment gains, half of all of that is legally yours. She seems to have forgotten that marriage is a financial partnership, regardless of who earned what. Her attempts to intimidate you into accepting less than you're legally entitled to, that's going to cost her. The divorce proceedings were scheduled for Tuesday morning. Melissa had been increasingly confident as the date approached, regularly making comments about how easy everything would be once we got to court. I almost feel bad for Jake, she told our neighbor Carol the weekend before our court date. He's going to be so out of his depth, my lawyer is going to eat him alive. On day night, Melissa made one final attempt to get me to settle out of court. Jake, I'm going to make you one last offer. You can keep your car, your clothes, and $20,000. I get everything else. If you drag this into court tomorrow, you're going to spend everything you have on legal fees and end up with nothing. I'll see you in court, Melissa. She laughed. Jake, you don't even have a lawyer. Are you going to represent yourself? This is going to be embarrassing for you. Tuesday morning, I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. Melissa was already there with her attorney, Richard Sterling, 52, a well-known divorce lawyer who specialized in high-asset cases. He had a reputation for being aggressive and expensive. Melissa was dressed in her best business suit, looking confident and composed. She saw me walk in alone and nudged her lawyer, pointing at me with a smug smile. That's him, I heard her say. I told you he couldn't afford representation. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff called our case. Morrison versus Morrison. Melissa and her lawyer approached the plaintiff's table. I started walking toward the defendant's table when the courtroom door opened behind me. Thomas walked in wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, carrying an expensive leather briefcase, and looking every inch the high-powered attorney he was. The entire courtroom went quiet. Even the judge looked up with interest. I watched Melissa's face change from confusion to recognition to absolute panic as Thomas approached the defendant's table and set down his briefcase. Your Honor, Thomas said in his courtroom voice, Thomas Morrison representing the defendant. Richard Sterling looked like he'd seen a ghost. He leaned over to whisper something to Melissa, whose face had gone completely pale. Mr. Morrison, the judge said, I wasn't aware you took divorce cases anymore. Only special ones, Your Honor. This one is personal. I watched Melissa lean frantically toward her lawyer, whispering urgently. He was nodding grimly and shuffling through papers with increasingly worried expressions. The proceedings that followed were unlike anything I could have imagined. Thomas dismantled Melissa's case piece by piece, methodically and professionally, but with an underlying intensity that made it clear this wasn't just business for him. He presented evidence of her financial abuse, her public statements about my inability to afford legal representation, her attempts to manipulate the divorce through intimidation, and her efforts to hide assets. He had recordings of her public comments about the divorce, statements from neighbors about her behavior, and a complete financial analysis that showed exactly how much community property she'd been trying to keep for herself. Your Honor, Thomas said during his opening statement, the plaintiff has engaged in a calculated campaign to emotionally and financially abuse my client. She has publicly humiliated him, attempted to use his profession as a teacher as grounds for reducing his settlement, and bragged openly about her belief that he couldn't afford legal representation to fight her unreasonable demands. Melissa's lawyer tried to object several times, but Thomas had done his homework. Every piece of evidence was admissible, every argument was legally sound, and every strategy was perfectly executed. The turning point came when Thomas called Melissa to the stand for cross-examination. Mrs. Morrison, did you or did you not tell your neighbor Carol Henderson that this divorce would be easy because your husband couldn't afford to fight you? Melissa looked panicked. I may have said something like that, but I didn't mean. Did you or did you not arrange for divorce papers to be served publicly in your neighborhood specifically to humiliate my client? That's not. I mean, I didn't arrange anything specific. Mrs. Morrison, did you tell my client, and I quote, I can afford a lawyer who will fight for my interests? Can you? On a teacher's salary with legal fees of $300 an hour, how long will you be able to sustain a battle? Her lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Thomas had recordings of her conversation with me, provided by our home security system that she'd forgotten about. By the end of the day, it was clear that Melissa's strategy had backfired spectacularly. Not only was I entitled to half of all marital assets, but her attempts to manipulate the process through financial intimidation had convinced the judge to award me additional compensation for emotional distress. I walked out of that courthouse with half of everything we'd built together, including half the value of the house she'd assumed she'd keep, half of her precious investment accounts, and half of her retirement savings. The woman who'd made me feel financially inadequate for 8 years was now legally required to pay me monthly spousal support while I rebuilt my life. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the moment Melissa realized that the quiet teacher she'd underestimated had resources she'd never known about, family connections she'd never suspected, and the strength to fight back when pushed too far. As we left the courthouse, Thomas put his hand on my shoulder. "Jake, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. And I'm sorry it took this for us to reconnect. Thomas, I can never repay you for this. You already have. You reminded me what it feels like to use my skills for something that actually matters." 6 months later, I'm living in a new apartment that I love, teaching at a school that appreciates me, and rebuilding my life on my own terms. I'm also rebuilding my relationship with Thomas, who's become not just my brother again, but my friend. Melissa moved to a smaller apartment across town and had to take on significant debt to pay the settlement. I heard through mutual friends that she tells people the divorce was more complicated than expected and refuses to discuss the details. I ran into Carol Henderson at the grocery store last month. She approached me with an apologetic smile. "Jake, I just wanted to say how sorry I am about everything that happened. Melissa painted such a different picture of your situation. I had no idea you had, well, such impressive family connections." "Carol, the most impressive thing about my family isn't my brother's career success. It's that when I needed help, he was there. That's what matters. I'm dating someone new now, Rebecca Walsh, 29, who's a social worker. She makes even less money than I do, and we split every check down the middle without either of us feeling inadequate about it. She thinks teaching is one of the most important professions in the world, and she's never once suggested I should do something more lucrative. The best part, Rebecca already knows about Thomas, about my family, about my past, and about everything I went through with Melissa. There are no secrets, no hidden resources, no surprises waiting to be revealed. Just two people building something honest together. Melissa taught me an important lesson about knowing my worth and refusing to let anyone make me feel small. But she also taught me something else. The people who truly matter in your life are the ones who value you for who you are, not what you can provide them. I'm grateful for that lesson, even if I wish I'd learned it sooner. And I'm grateful that when my wife tried to destroy me by assuming I had no resources to fight back, she inadvertently gave me the push I needed to reconnect with my brother and remember that I'm worth fighting for. Sometimes the quiet guy really does have a few surprises left.